This podcast is not suitable for children or those who are easily disturbed. Spoiler warning for whatever is in the title of this episode.
And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share and subscribe. Follow Daniel at DStarSick on Twitter. Follow Ryan at Darth Damio on the Bluebird app. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/the Horror of Babylon. In closing, you can let your friends know that the Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible and all other major podcast apps.
Welcome to episode 62 of the Horror of Babylon, where we are discussing Makt Myrkranna, aka Powers of Darkness. I am Ryan, and with me as always is Daniel. Say hi, Daniel.
There is no way I'm pronouncing that.
I practiced a couple of the Icelandic things we're going to discuss.
I tried. I honestly did. And then I realized, no, Ryan's just going to make fun of me the whole time when I mispronounce this.
I mispronounce things all the time. I practice this one a lot. Makt Myrkranna, Powers of Darkness.
I really think you should be like a professional book reader.
That would be much more enjoyable than my current job. Quick shout out to our patrons, Abigail the First, Mother of Dragons, Breaker of Chains, and
Logan, the Full Metal Patron.
And for Horsemen Comics and Gaming, which you can visit in Morgantown, West Virginia at the Morgantown Mall, or the mall at Robinson in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and say hello to that jolly pervert himself, Grampus the Third.
New book, new novel. Let's jump into our history. Basically, we're going to get into more detail, but basically this is the Icelandic version of Dracula.
Yep.
I first read this last year after reading Dracula and wanting more. And I'll get into specifics as to why later in the episode, but I was blown away, not only by the book, but really the story of the book.
Yeah, I was way more blown away by the story of the book.
Well, I'm blown away by part of the book.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah. And so was just super excited when we decided to cover Dracula. I was like, we have to do Powers of Darkness. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and had you heard of this before I suggested it?
Nope.
Which
is weird considering how many books about Dracula that I've read and own. This has never come up in them.
Probably most of those books were published before Powers of Darkness was translated into English.
Yeah.
The vampire's a pure myth, superstition. I may be able to bring you proof that the superstition of yesterday can become the scientific reality of today.
Well, let's go ahead and jump into background, and I'm going to kind of give an overview of what this is, and then we're going to get into a discussion about the book, and then probably more of a discussion about the history of the book and what it is than a discussion of the book itself. So, the novel Dracula by Bram Stoker was published in 1897. Its first international translation was published the next year, 1898, in Hungarian. By all accounts, the Hungarian version of the novel is just a straight translation from the English version. In 1889, a Swedish version of Dracula was published periodically in newspapers that ended up being longer than the English version of the novel. We'll come back to that.
Yep.
And then in 1900, an Icelandic version of Dracula was also published periodically in newspapers and ended up being shorter than the original English novel. This version is known as Makt Myrkranna, which translates in English to Powers of Darkness. This is essentially the Icelandic version of Dracula that was published in newspapers from 1900 to 1901. For an author, you can credit a few different people. Of course, Bram Stoker, who penned the original Dracula novel, debatably may or may not have had little to no involvement of this, or possibly had a lot of involvement.
Possibly had all the involvement.
Possibly. It was translated from the Swedish to Icelandic, so the person who did this worked from the Swedish version, not from the English version. That was Johann Valdemar Austmundsson. I practiced that a lot.
I can tell.
And then this one I didn't practice, so this is going to be bad. Then the person who translated this from Icelandic into English for the modern English release, which I think was in 2017 or so.
Yeah, it's relatively recent.
Very recent. His name is Hans Cornel de Roos.
That wasn't bad.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah,
So
it sounds similar to when I listened to the audiobook, so...
Just some factoids, and then we're going to get into a discussion here. At the time of its release, this work only had one Icelandic review, and it was a person who said that this book was worthless rubbish, and sometimes even worse than worthless, completely devoid of poetry and beauty, and far removed from any psychological truth. Now, the first... No.
Guy's a killjoy.
He's a douche. Or was a douche, because he's long dead.
Yeah, good.
Regardless of this bad review, this version of Dracula remained very popular, and the main version of Dracula in Iceland, was so popular it was reprinted in 1950. In fact, in Iceland, the work of Dracula and the adaptations, including the Bela Lugosi film, are known as Makt Myrkranna, not Dracula.
Yeah.
And the poet laureate of Iceland has praised Powers of Darkness as being one of Iceland's best pieces of literature. Now, this work didn't come to the worldwide stage until 1986, when American scholar Richard Dalby published an English translation of the preface that is supposedly written by Bram Stoker. And that's when people started to examine the Icelandic version and like, this isn't the same book. This isn't just an Icelandic translation of Dracula. This is basically a totally different book.
Yeah, it's different.
And once Powers of Darkness was translated and published in English as a separate novel, that quickly led to this discovery of the Swiss version that it turns out that Powers of Darkness was actually based on. And you can now, since the publication of Powers of Darkness in 2017 in English, you can now read the Swiss version in English as well, which I did not know about till today. We have no plans to cover this at this time. We may do this eventually.
Patreon stretch goal.
However, the struggle with the Swedish version is that, as I said, it's longer than the original version of Dracula, which isn't so bad because Dracula isn't like a super long book.
No, I'd say it's like by today's standards, it's medium, maybe a little even below medium.
The struggle for me would be that there's no print copy and there's no audiobook version.
Oh, God.
It's exclusive to Kindle.
No, can't do it.
So you would have to read a longer version of Dracula just on Kindle.
I can't do that, no.
So if there's
a big Patreon stretch goal.
Yeah, if a print version comes out or an audiobook version comes out, I would definitely be up for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's that. Another story in the classic, infallible 3-act structure. Good enough for Aristotle, good enough for The Simpsons.
Mr. Sislak, I have a feeling there's going to be one more act to this story.
Well, I'm not hanging around for that. 4 acts.
We're moving to structures and themes. And the first thing we want to discuss is who actually wrote Makt Myrkranna. Like I said, Bram Stoker wrote Dracula. It was translated into Swedish and expanded, released periodically in newspapers. And then from that, Johann Valdemar Alstensson translated that from Swedish to Icelandic and came up with a shorter version. And if you don't do anything else, read or listen to the introduction and prologue to Powers of Darkness.
It's free on Audible.
Yeah, it's free if you have an Audible membership. And it explains, like, the entire history of this work.
I will pimp Audible just for this.
And it's super fascinating. Even if you don't go on to actually listen to the actual book, the history of it is crazy. But
I could have listened to an entire book just discussing this.
yes.
And honestly, it was almost half of the time.
Yeah, it was. So there's a few different, like, introductions written by several different people, and they all kind of make arguments as to how involved they think Bram Stoker was.
Versus Vladimir.
Yeah.
Is it Vladimir?
Valdemar.
Valdemar. I'm going to say Vladimir.
Think Voldemort,
Voldemort.
but Valdemar. not
Voldemar.
Mort. Valdemar.
Voldemar.
Or just say the Iceland guy.
The Iceland guy.
So,
IG.
what are your thoughts? And there's no definitive answer because we don't know.
There is no definitive answer. I think a lot of them make pretty good points. I after listening to it, if I had to, like, take a guess, like a shot in the dark, just based off of listening to the book, I would say that I think Bram Stoker is all over the Jonathan Harker part. And then the Iceland guy didn't want to do the journal for him anymore and just took the notes.
We're going to, in the next section, we're going to
We'll
discuss
that.
the changes.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of them.
But I think that change, again, and I'm not a literary scholar. This is just me listening to it. I go, that definitely sort of, even with the changes, still sounds like Stoker. This kind of doesn't. It sounds like Cliff Notes.
So the first half of Dracula, where Jonathan Harker, or in this version, Thomas Harker, is...
Don't get me started.
No. Henry Victor! The first half of the novel, where he's at Dracula's castle. There are several changes to that in Powers of Darkness. There are a couple theories. One is that it's based on an earlier revision of the original Dracula novel that Stoker ended up not using, and that somehow the Swedish, the people who published it in Swedish got a hold of that, and then, of course, Valdemar was working from the Swedish version and adapted that for the Icelandic version. The other theory is that Stoker was corresponding with Valdemar and collaborating on the Icelandic version.
Saying, like, yeah, you know, this might be good for that.
Do this, do that. These are some ideas that I had in previous revisions, and this is something that you could do. And one of the people who wrote part of the introduction kind of backs this up by saying that Icelandic literature and Norse literature and Viking literature was something that Stoker's class of his generation studied a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of his peers traveled to Iceland and studied Icelandic folklore. And even though Valdemar isn't recognized today as being like a huge Icelandic figure in Icelandic literature, he at the time was recognized by a lot of people as being like at the forefront of Icelandic writing.
He was a contemporary.
Yeah.
And we'll get into some of the differences too, but like with the corresponding and when we get to things that are added in, there's a lot more what would have been at the time like pop culture references.
Yeah. There are common references to current events.
Yeah. And I can see that being something that Valdemar added in himself just to be like, oh, this is something people will recognize. I can also see that as something that Stoker wanted to put in but then took out, maybe thinking it was cheesy.
Yeah. So, for instance, in Powers of Darkness, there are references to the Jack the Ripper murders.
Yeah.
However...
That's the big one.
What leads some scholars to think that Stoker was involved is there's also references to the victims that were pulled out of the Thames River that weren't publicly acknowledged to be official Jack Jack the Ripper victims, but in recent years, scholars think that they probably are.
Mm-hmm.
And this wouldn't have been something at the time that someone outside of the United Kingdom would have been aware of. So the person who wrote this says that it's unlikely that Voldemort would have been aware of it, and the fact that it's included in the book kind of lends to the theory that Stoker had some involvement. Let's talk about some of the changes to the actual book so we can kind of deepen this discussion.
Yes, sir.
So, as we discussed on our Dracula episode, there are kind of three parts of the novel.
The Holy Trinity.
Harker, Batman, the dark part, and then Superman, the middle part, and then Wonder Woman, the
Mina part.
The Mina part. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the first part is Jonathan Harker in Dracula's castle. The second part is kind of Lucy's part with her fall to Dracula and Van Helsing and Stewart investigating that. And then the third part is like everything getting pulled together by Mina and the rest of the crew and them going off across Europe after Dracula.
Yep.
So, the first portion of the novel, Jonathan Harker in Dracula's castle, in Bram Stoker's original version that was published in 1897, was approximately 22,700 words. In Powers of Darkness, it's 37,200 words, which is a gain of about 63%.
Yep.
So that is lengthened considerably. And then the second portion of the novel, which was approximately 137,860 words, is shortened to approximately 9,100 words, which is a 93% loss. And then the third part is essentially eliminated completely because they kill Dracula in London.
You didn't give me anything for this when I was going in.
No, I wanted you to go in blind.
And I thought I downloaded the wrong thing at first because I was like, this is only like 7 hours long. I was like, I thought this was like an extended version or something. You're like, no,
Nope.
don't think of that.
Nope.
And so I'm listening to it, and then like, I think it's like 2.5 hours of it is just the introductions.
It's long.
And I was like, did I download the wrong? I still thought I downloaded the wrong thing. I'm like, I mean, this is super interesting. I'll have a lot to say. But and then the book started. I was like, huh. And then it gets to like, there's like an hour left. And I'm like, how are they going to do everything?
So the audiobook, I don't have exact numbers. This is something like 7-ish hours long. And again, this is free on Audible.
I can pull it up right now.
Yeah, go for it. We'll just pause here real quick.
We'll just do a little pause. I meant to have this already pulled up because I have them downloaded and I was looking at them and it's baffling to me. Let me go to my library. Okay, we have... Okay, never mind. It says I have 1 minute left on each of them.
I think I can get it quick.
That's what happens when I don't listen to the last 1 minute outro.
I always let it play through so it resets. Okay, so the Powers of Darkness audiobook, quote-unquote, the lost version of Dracula, is 7 hours and 27 minutes long.
Oh, so we were pretty close.
Yeah, the introduction is probably, I don't have an exact figure, but it's probably about 2 hours-ish worth of that. And then the portion where Harker is in Dracula's castle is probably like 3 to 4 hours.
I think it was like 3.5.
Yeah. And then the rest of it is like an hour or less.
Yeah.
The word that I don't remember who, but someone in the introduction used to describe the last part is essentially a coda.
Yeah.
Where it is just an outline of what happens.
That's what it reads like.
But there are also drastic changes to the story.
It is an outline to a version I haven't read.
Yes.
That is how it felt to me.
Pretty much the biggest change is that the second half of the novel drops the journal, letter, newspaper format.
That was so jarring to me.
It's very... Jarring is a good word for it. It really reads less like a novel and more like almost like a Cliff Notes version of what happens.
Cliff Notes is exactly how I would describe it.
And there's some speculation as to why that is. One of the theories that's presented in the introduction is that Valdemar is printing this in a newspaper, and he's working off the Swedish version, which is longer. And he's publishing this book a little bit at a time in a newspaper. And the thought is that he finally gets to where Dracula's castle arc ends, and he's going on to the rest of it, and he just is like, fuck this, I don't want to do this anymore. So he just basically writes a coda that wraps up the story.
And that is what it feels like to me.
However,
yeah,
this coda doesn't just summarize the second half of the Dracula novel. There are significant changes. So, and I have not read the Swedish version, but what this leads me to believe is, like there are significant changes in the first half or Harker's in the castle, there are also significant changes to the second half, and the Swedish version is probably has all of those changes. And if we were to actually sit down and read the Swedish version, it would be more like the first half of Powers of Darkness just expanded.
Yeah. I don't have any additional thoughts. I just agree with that. I think that's what the case is.
The guy who published the Swedish version on Kindle is a guy who runs a blog. It's not as heavily peer-reviewed as this translation of the Icelandic version is.
Yeah, this is... God, there was like 3 different dudes talking about this book at the beginning.
Yeah.
Darcy Stoker, who has a vested interest in his family's lineage.
Yeah.
And then you had some literary scholars.
One of them was Hans whatever, who translated it from Icelandic to English.
Yeah.
And then another, and they also like highly reviewed like the history of the Dracula manuscript. And they talked a lot about Dracula's Guest, which we did an episode on.
Yeah, like how long he worked on these and what he was taking out and his possible thought processes. They even talked about his issues with copyright.
Yeah. Honestly, if you have to choose between listening to us or listening to the intro to Powers of Darkness...
Listen to the intro.
Yeah, for sure.
I will 100% pause this, maybe come back, maybe don't.
Yeah.
In fact, if you choose not to come back, but you choose to listen to that intro, I will not begrudge you.
No,
I will be happy.
Yeah, that's... Because it's really worth listening.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really great.
I can't do it justice as much as I want to.
So let's get into some of the specific changes, talking about like the actual novel itself. And we'll kind of hit some high themes. And we'll talk about, what themes are kind of carried over from Dracula to Powers of Darkness, what themes are carried over but are maybe more so than in Dracula, and then what are some new themes.
Yeah.
The obvious one is vampirism.
I have this weird thought on vampirism when it comes to the differences between Powers of Darkness and Dracula. In Dracula, it feels like a much more mysterious force. Like, you're kind of trying to uncover it, but you don't get all the information. You get just enough to fight it. Where in this, it's like, hey, here's Dracula's entire cult and everything going on and probably how it functions. I feel like you can infer a lot more from this book than you can from Dracula.
Yeah, I agree. So, and let's tie that comment into this, in that in the original Dracula, there is a theme that Dracula is an allegory for wealthy foreign powers coming into the United Kingdom. I feel like that is emphasized more heavily.
If it's not outright stated, I felt like it might have been, but...
I mean, to the point where Dracula he's less so a monster who wants to move to London because London has foggy streets and I want to be able to catch victims off guard. But he's actually a political revolutionary, and he has like a cabal of people throughout Europe who are planning like these coups d'etats and stuff.
And he's talking about how much he loves the anarchists.
Yeah.
It's far more explicit. This is a difference, and it's mostly my interpretation of Dracula, right? when I read Dracula, I read a story about a monster who has drained his food supply and now has to go find a new one. Like, all the villagers have moved away from his castle. He has to go further and further to just get a baby for his 3 brides.
They're all super... There's plenty of people, but they're all aware of him and they're scared of him and they take precautions.
They got the crosses.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I can't... It's harder to hunt here.
He needs a new hunting ground. He's choosing London because, 1, the number of people. 2, it's overcrowded.
Yeah,
There are
densely populated. People
fog.
disappear.
Yeah, he can hunt at night in the cover of the London fog. And
None of that is explicitly stated, but that's how I've always sort of read it.
Yeah.
It's like he's maybe not run out of resources, but he's run out of ways to extract those resources.
Yeah. Or at least easily.
Yeah, and I always thought that was super explicit when he gives a baby to 3 vampires. Like, how do you share a baby?
It's hard, I guess.
Where in this version...
have you seen 3 men and a baby?
That was funnier than it should have been. But in this, like, Jonathan Harker comes across... Or Thomas Harker comes across his entire cult of ape-like people... like worshiping and like they're sacrificing a woman, and like he sees someone else like a whole other person besieged. It feels more like I'm doing this to conquer as opposed to I'm doing this because I'm fucking hungry.
Yes.
Again, that's an interpretation. That's not something that is explicitly stated in Dracula, but that's how I've always read it.
No, I agree with what you're saying. He's a revolutionary. There's also aspects of Dracula where he's a scientist. Like, he wants Harker to categorize his scientific equipment.
I don't know what none of that shit is.
Yeah, no, he's just like, I can't fucking do that. But it makes him... There's talk of him, like, experimenting with reanimation, like he's Victor Frankenstein.
He straight up talks about necromancy and just like, oh, you guys are just so far behind in Europe. Or in England.
Let's table the rest of that till we get to characters.
Yeah, because we got a lot to say on that.
Another big change is, and I'm not going to speak to this, Daniel can if he's brave, but just because I'm not informed enough about it, but there are lots of references to Icelandic folklore.
I do not know anything about Icelandic folklore, except what was stated in the intro to this book.
Exactly. If you want more information on that, you can go to the intro, you can read the actual book.
I was listening for the references, and I don't think I caught them all, because I don't know what they're talking about.
Even the introduction says they're very subtle, and you would only pick them up if you were heavily educated in Icelandic folklore.
Yeah.
And I don't even have, like, a basic understanding of it. So, yeah, that's there.
I encourage people to learn. They talked about it in the intro, right? Like, Icelandic is trolls, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I get some basic white American here. I get some cultures confused. I try not to, and I try to do better when I get mixed up, but there you go. I remember hearing something about trolls either in the book or in the intro.
Before this, like, if you'd said the word Iceland to me, the 2 things that I would think of would be D2, the Mighty Ducks, where they go up against the Iceland.
I never watched any of the Mighty Duck movies.
In the second one, they're in like a junior Olympics. They're Team America.
Okay.
In the finals, they go up against Team Iceland, which are big. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, they're on ice all the time. It's in the name.
And then the second thing would be in season 24 of The Simpsons, it's revealed that Carl is from Iceland. And they do this whole episode where Carl has to go back to Iceland to see his family, and
which one's Carl?
The black guy.
What?
As in, like, Lenny and Carl.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
There's not very many black people in Iceland.
How do you know? Have you ever been to Iceland?
I'm pretty sure I could look up the statistics right now.
They explain that. But
okay.
Homer and Barney, Lenny and Moe all go to Iceland after him. And it's this whole thing. But I'm more interested in Icelandic culture after reading this book, but I still don't know very much.
Okay, sandwich between when we do more Treehouse of Horrors. Can we watch that episode?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not the greatest episode, but it's just fun.
I'm just curious now based off of this.
The premise is just so crazy, it's worth watching.
Yeah.
Okay. So something we could speak a little more to, the theme of sexuality is just a smidge more prevalent in Powers of Darkness than it is in Dracula.
Thomas is not as faithful as Jonathan, and even Jonathan was a little tempted by foul seductresses. Thomas only has one, and he's
Only one.
And he's like, you know what? Not Mina.
Wilma.
Yeah, if I was engaged to a woman named Wilma, I might cheat too. Like, he's writing in his journal, like, how he kissed her, and then later he's writing, oh, my Wilma, I loved you so much. And I'm just sitting there thinking, like, you went out of your way to see this bitch, like, 3 times.
She sits on his lap.
Yeah.
Which I know doesn't...
I've never kissed a woman before.
Not getting into too many specifics, but basically the 3 Dracula wives from the original are not in this. There's one,
And she's like an actual character.
yeah, she's a real character, which I like, and Dracula explains her as his crazy niece.
Who thinks she's her ancestor. It's Carmilla.
Yeah, she's essentially Carmilla, and she's attempting to seduce Harker. And she shows up again and again and again. And he even knows where she lives in the castle. And he has like these inner monologues where he's like, all I can think about is going there to see her at night. But I know I must be faithful to my Wilma. But he keeps going there and things keep happening. They kiss. She sits on his lap. And yes, he is under her spell. So
Vilfs have that effect on you, man.
yeah, it's...
If Mavis was just kind of chilling in a castle, I don't think I could be strong.
And the last theme I wanted, the theme of faith is kind of lessened, and that's mainly because the second half of the story is mostly cut out.
Yeah,
because that's where that theme comes up more. Okay, so let's jump into characters. We're gonna start with Dracula, and we already talked a lot about him being the proponent of a new world order, and we mentioned his Frankensteinish experiments.
He is far more of an actual character in this.
Yes.
Like, he has... not that he didn't have a personality, but it was way more subdued in Dracula. And this is a lot more explicit. Like, he tries to hide it a little bit, but he gets off on violence.
Yes.
He's like, oh yes, that Jack the Ripper. Oh, that sounds so cool, doesn't it, Thomas? Tell me more about your violent streets of London and its fog.
It implies that the Jack the Ripper killings are basically Dracula's inspiration to choose London as his new hunting ground.
You guys couldn't even catch him. It was so great.
Yeah, which makes sense. Like, if you're a vampire, abduct people and feed on them, and you hear about this overcrowded, foggy city that has this serial killer that's on the loose that the authorities have no chance of catching, then you'd want to go there.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. And I can't remember who performed this book, but whoever they did, whenever they were doing Dracula, it was great.
I have that in their notes. We're going to bring it up later.
It was so good. Just the guy literally sounds like he's turned on as he's reading this.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite narrators. I'm going to bring it up later.
Awesome.
We're going to table that.
Tabled.
Okay. Dracula has a servant in this.
Yeah, the dumb deaf mute.
So part of the Dracula novel is that when Dracula and Jonathan Harker first meet, Dracula's in disguise and pretending to be his coachman, and then the whole time that Harker is at Dracula's castle, he's like saying, oh, my people, they are asleep right now, they cannot handle this. And then Harker's like, how come nobody comes out to clear the table? How come there's not a bell for the servants?
That's one of the reasons how I mentioned, like, how it feels like Dracula's drained everything, versus this one where he actually
just has a servant,
and he wants to conquer stuff.
Yeah. He has one servant who, well, and he kind of has some enforcers, but we'll get to that. But he has one deaf mute servant who takes care of things, and it kind of makes sense in that if you were the Dracula, you would probably want to have like one person around to just kind of like curb the suspicion from Harker. So I thought that change kind of made sense, but I really like the mystery of the original novel there.
Yeah.
The cult of ape-like people is super ridiculous, but I love it.
I thought it was a little much. I didn't hate it, But I was just like, I was sitting there like, are they going to go to Europe with them? Like, what's the plan here?
Basically, as we said, the first part of the novel is expanded, and a lot of that is Harker exploring the castle. And there's a point where he finds a hidden passageway, and there's a staircase that leads down into the crypts. He goes down there, and he finds like this underground cathedral where Dracula is sacrificing a woman, and he has all of these like ape-like people, like kind of picturing like half Neanderthal, half human, like not fully evolved people who are like on their knees worshiping him. It very much put me in like Temple of Doom kind of vibes.
That's 100% what I was picturing in my. I even had the in my brain hole. I was picturing the Kali statue in the back.
Kalima,
even though that that's definitely not there, but it was there in my brain.
It also puts me a little bit in the mind of Beneath the Planet of the Apes, with the underground race of people who worship the missile,
the bomb. Yeah. I love that movie.
I do too. I really do. It's super ridiculous. I fucking love it. I think it's cool. It is much. It
is much. I don't know if I can call it fair, but I think it's inevitable that you compare this to Dracula.
Yeah.
I think that this is going to be maybe 1% of the population's first experience with Dracula.
It's hard for me to imagine that anyone outside of Iceland would read this first, but I guess surely there's somebody.
Yeah.
But apparently, like, the way the introduction makes it seem is that this was Dracula in Iceland. So this is what people grew up with. And they just weren't aware or didn't care about the original version, or they were just like the rest of the world. Well, that's just the English version of Powers of Darkness. It's just the same thing, but in English.
There's some Icelandic podcasters out there right now talking about how
have you read the English Powers of Darkness?
It's not that good, right? There's no ape cult.
There's no ape cult. There's no white lady.
Yeah.
Speaking of the white lady,
I love her.
I thought she was a good change.
I agree. I thought she was a good change.
It gives more, or a little bit more depth to Jonathan and Mina's relationship, because he has like some actual real temptation.
You mean Thomas and Wilma?
No, I mean Jonathan and Mina. And you can write it off as that Thomas is under her spell, but it doesn't change the fact that he's continually tempted by her, and she's like a real force.
I think he's just a weak man who wants to nut.
And I also love the backstory of like him going up to look at all the Dracula portraits and seeing a portrait of what we the audience assume is her, but what Dracula within the story explains is an ancestor who his deranged niece believes to be her, but is actually probably you assume is just her.
Could you imagine like a vampire today trying to sell that to one of us? Like, oh no, she just thinks she's her great, and we'd be like, dude, we read this book.
No, dude, I have a face recognition app on my phone, and it's a 97.3% match. Stop it with your stupid smartphones. Stupid.
Would a vampire show up on this if they don't have a reflection?
I don't know.
There's a pre-show for us sometime. Modern technology versus vampires.
He would probably smash the smartphone, and this is an item of vanity.
You know what? Hard degree Dracula.
You're not wrong. Selfies?
Yeah, I will join the Powers of Darkness.
Instagram is all vanity.
To get rid of TikTok, I will join.
Okay. Actually, and I missed this. So one of the people who wrote the introduction says that Dracula in Powers of Darkness is more masculine than he is in Dracula. Do you agree with that?
I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm like comparing it to like not even modern masculinity, but like 1940s, 50s masculinity with the boxing like this.
Yeah.
I don't think
Fisticuffs.
either of them come across as masculine in that regard. I mean, Dracula gives Thomas a ring as a present, and I just can't imagine doing that to another dude.
No.
Being like, hey, will you take my ring, buddy? It's a promise ring. I want you to
promise to be your friend forever.
I want you to promise to not to bang the white lady.
I'm gonna get you a ring for Christmas next year. I'm doing it.
It's canon now.
Okay.
I'm gonna wear it on this. I'm gonna wear it right here.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I don't want to go over like point by point with like every single character, but just Thomas and Wilma, Jonathan and Mina. Some of the differences. First, what were your thoughts reading this for the first time?
Thomas, compared to Jonathan, is way more ready to try to handle shit. Number one, he has a gun.
He has a gun. He continually makes sure it's loaded.
And he goes back for it. He's like, you know what? I'm just going to grab that just in case. This
version of Harker is the one who's watched horror movies and is like, no, wait, I need a gun before I do this.
And, as like a modern reader, that baffles me because like I couldn't take a gun with me to a foreign country.
No, but this is 1900 when this was published.
And so like
you just throw it in your suitcase.
Yeah, but back when you could do that, I'd be like, yeah, why wouldn't you take one? There's wolves and shit.
And it also like highwaymen and just like trains would get held up.
Like take a knife at least. Yeah. Like to me, Jonathan is a priss compared to Thomas. This dude's like, he's like, you know what? I challenge you to a duel. Yeah.
He's probably the more masculine one. And even in the fact that
he's even hornier.
That's what I was going to say, the male stereotype where he's more tempted by the one woman he's confronted with than Jonathan is by the three women he's confronted with.
He's like, you guys are thoughts. I'm going after my Mina.
So, talking about Mina, there are some significant changes to her. When in the latter half of the book, when she reads Thomas's journal, she doesn't initially believe it, whereas Mina is right on board with Jonathan from the start. And when she has her meeting with Professor Van Helsing, she's like, that guy is crazy, which is a huge change for her character.
That is so big.
I know, but
I don't know what else to say about it other than that's different, though.
But in regards to Mina and the rest of the characters, they're not really characters because the second half of the story is all cut out, mostly.
Yeah, they're bullet points of who the characters were.
But there are changes.
Yeah.
For instance...
the doctor.
Dr. Seward goes mad and burns his hospital to the ground.
He's like, you guys don't get it. I've seen the face of death.
But it's stuff like that really makes me want to read the Swedish version, where probably that's where these things come from, but the Swedish version is a full novel, and I want to see like what the fuck happened.
I agree with that. I don't know if this is a criticism of Dracula per se, and maybe it's just because I'm a sick motherfucker. But I always I love Dracula to death. It's my second on our book list so far.
Me too.
But I'm always like, I don't think enough of these people died.
Yeah.
And Quincy just kind of dies on accident.
I actually...
By like, sheer bad luck.
And I actually don't even really like that Quincy dies.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's kind of like, kill a realistic number of them or don't kill anybody.
Yeah.
It seems like you just kind of randomly kill the American character at the end. Not that,
Yeah. Mr. Racist Stoker.
Yeah.
What was your cat's name?
Exactly. Us poor Americans not getting enough representation.
But I like, even if he doesn't die, like the idea that Dracula affects more of them.
Yeah,
I like.
Yeah,
I like the idea of that. I just, but because it's the bullet notes version, I don't get enough of it.
I would love to read the full fleshed out version of that story, and maybe if it never comes to it, maybe I'll eventually break down and buy the Kindle version and try it. But I would love for an actual printed version.
I would like something especially peer reviewed by the same kind of literary scholars.
Yeah, exactly.
With the same kind of intro where they talk about like what was maybe Stoker's and what was maybe added and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I would imagine that based on how like enthusiastic everybody in this project was, that they aren't also working on the Swedish version.
Yeah.
Because and even if that one's not free on Audible, I will throw money at it.
I will spend a credit, and if I don't have a credit, I will spend actual money. Spoiler alert, I just ordered a physical copy of Powers of Darkness to add to my Dracula collection.
Yeah, I want to get one as well. I just want to have something that I can mark up with a highlighter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So those are kind of the one other, no Renfield.
No Renfield, and we get a cop character, but he doesn't really amount to too much.
Yeah.
I feel like in maybe the Swedish version, he's a full-fledged character.
Yeah.
He's mentioned, and he does stuff, but it's not enough for me to be able to say anything about him.
He's investigating the political revolutionary aspect of Dracula.
And he goes looking for Thomas.
Yes. And he interviews Wilma.
I did like that in the second part of the book, where they're when they're going in looking for Thomas, and they're like, I don't think that person people have spotted was really Thomas, and that kind of. I think that would be super interesting to read more of.
That's why I'm curious if this Swedish version, maybe it's even the better version of Dracula.
Yeah,
but we'll see. Maybe we'll see eventually.
Yeah. There's also the possibility that it's too long.
Which is very possible. Just a note on Renfield. We mentioned in our Dracula episode that if you just did a summary of the plot, it would be so easy to leave Renfield out because he doesn't really matter, but he's more crucial to the themes.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happens in this.
They cut him. They're like, don't need him.
Oh, and I also want to use this as an opportunity to something you mentioned in our Dracula episode. And this is specifically mentioned in the introduction as well, but this version of the story just eliminates all the dick sucking.
Yeah.
Every letter, every diary entry that starts with endless sentences of praise for the other characters, like John Seward is such a honest, valiant man. Mina Harker is a woman among women, and
Lucy's bust is so big. But I was her third pick.
Yeah, poor Quincy. Poor Quincy. That's all completely gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll kill you all! I'll drive you crazy, and I'll kill you all! I'm every nightmare you ever had. I am your worst dream come true. I'm everything you ever were afraid of.
Scary shit. Is this book scary?
I think there are scary things in it. It's basically my same opinion of Dracula, maybe a little bit less so, because I don't get stuff like you do get the Demeter, but it's not.
It's abbreviated.
I think it's scarier when you get the ship logs and you get the people kind of going missing and everyone's getting paranoid, but what the fuck can they do?
It's easier to put yourself in the position of one of the sailors when you're reading the ship logs.
I've told you a dozen times to play the Vampire the Masquerade, and in that game, spoiler, there's a ship that everyone's gone missing on, and you can go in and get into the ship logs on the computer.
Demeter.
Yeah, it's so fucking great. It's my favorite part of the game, and it's the biggest pain in the ass.
I agree. The scarier part is, of course, the part that's expanded, which is the exploration of the castle.
Yeah.
One thing that's in Powers of Darkness, or Makt Myrkranna, that's not in Dracula, is Harker finds the body of a murdered villager, a young woman, and he's scurrying around the castle trying to find somebody because he just found a corpse, and he's like, I gotta tell somebody, I gotta
do something.
He can't, and it's that was something of note.
I think Dracula literally almost touching himself over murders is a little scary.
Yeah.
If I was talking to somebody about a murder that just happened, and they're just getting... It's like when I see some of my patients watching true crime shit at work, and they're just so fascinated. I'm like,
maybe you shouldn't watch that.
I know what you guys did.
This is pornographic to you.
Yeah.
Kiss me, fat boy!
Moving on to Kiss Me, Fat Boy. How fast would you have been murdered by the White Lady?
First night.
First night?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm very aware of a lot of my character flaws, and one of them that I tell people all the time is I'm pretty sure I'm a sex addict now.
I think I would have made it 2 or 3.
I think
I would have been killed.
I think you would have made it longer.
But I would have been killed.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that I wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Oh my God, are you Stephen King? No, I'm Dean Koontz. Oh.
To Kings and Koontz, I'd like you to give both of yours first.
Both of mine first?
Yeah, go ahead.
My king is the expansion of Dracula's character. Some of that isn't so great, some of that is super great, and I'm choosing to focus on the super great parts.
Some of it that isn't super great is just, at least you get to experience something different. It doesn't change the original novel.
And it's so great to see, and I mean, you see him in movies all the time as a character, but from like a literary perspective, like he has a personality and beliefs that you can identify.
And the narration makes that even more so.
Yeah. That is my biggest king, and my Koontz is all the journal entries in the second part disappearing.
Yes. Okay. I'll go ahead and say my Koontz is the same.
Yeah.
Although I understand, like, based on the working theory, why that happened.
Yeah, like, I get it, but I'm still disappointed.
At least we got through it faster because of that.
Oh, yeah, I got through this in, like, 2 days.
Yeah. I'm going to be a little unconventional with King. I have 4.
Oh, wow.
I have a 3-way tie for second place.
Okay, I want to hear this.
And then I have a first place. So, in second place, 3-way tie, the first thing I want to mention is just the expanded exploration of Dracula's castle.
Liked it.
I loved getting to spend more time in that set piece, finding more things, the portrait gallery, the background on the White Lady herself, discovering the murdered body, the underground chapel with the fucking ape people. Temple of Doom and Beneath the Planet of the Apes are 2 of my all-time favorite movies, so I just loved being put in that mindset. Second is the White Lady herself. She's just such a great addition to the story. Dracula's 3 wives are super iconic, but I think this just worked better.
I agree. I think it works better.
I wish that she would get a spin-off novel that we could read.
I mean, is this in the public domain? We could write it.
I guess we could.
Yeah.
Add that to our list.
Yeah.
And then my third in the 3-way tie for second place is just the fact that this book existed for 100 years almost, and nobody outside of Iceland was aware of it.
That is kind of fascinating.
Like, what other versions of novels exist in foreign countries that we have no idea of? Like, is there a Bulgarian version of Frankenstein that's just so wildly different that it's worth being translated into English and read and studied on its own? What if there's a Spanish version of Carmilla where she wins and she fucking kills everybody? Like,
she finally gets to scissor at the end. She gets to
scissor. Like, what other things exist out there that we just have no idea about? And then my actual king, that this is really more for me and Daniel, but I'll try to explain for you, the audience.
Okay.
We're both big fans of a little novel that's really not little at all, called Shogun by James Clavell.
It's so good.
If you've never heard of it, it's the story of a man named John Blackthorne, who was an English sailor who's marooned in Japan and essentially has to join them or die. It's the story of how he becomes a samurai.
There's a timeline where we just do the Asian Saga as a podcast
instead of this, which honestly is probably the superior timeline. In this novel, he ends up in this small village, and this village is ruled by a ruthless samurai named Yabu. And Yabu is Blackthorne's antagonist through the entire novel, all the way up through the end. They're on the same side politically, but they're like antagonists to each other, and they're like...
It's literally the best parts of Game of Thrones.
Yeah. The main portion of Powers of Darkness is narrated by Ralph Lister, who also narrates the audiobook of Shogun. And the voice he does for Dracula in this book is the exact same voice he does for Yabu.
Oh, that's great. I'm going to have to listen to Shogun now.
Every time I'm Dracula addresses Harker, in my head I just hear, Anjin-san! Get to the bath! Clean your nasty self!
That'll make me sick.
It just cracked me up the entire time.
That's great.
Yes. Okay. Moving on to rankings. We gotta start wrapping this up.
Yes, sir. Oh, God.
I already ranked it.
Let me see where you put yours.
And honestly, it's kind of high. But when you take my ranking into consideration, it's not only the book itself, but it's the story of the book, the analysis of the book. I have it at number 4, which is between Frankenstein and The Mist. I could see on another day where I could put it at 5 between The Mist and The Only Good. I could see another day I might put it at 6 under The Only Good Indians and above Firestarter. But it's high up there for me. And it's not just... If I was only ranking the book itself, which maybe I should do, but it's the whole story of the book and the mystery of the book and the fact that this existed for 80 years before people out of Iceland even knew about it.
And to be fair to you, you get all of that when you listen to this.
Yes.
And when you read this, because it's in the physical editions too.
Yes. So, for right now, I'm putting it at number 4. I considered putting it at number 2 as a tie with Dracula, but we don't do ties.
We don't do ties.
If we did do ties, I would probably put Dracula / Powers of Darkness at my number 2. But they are also they're different books.
Yeah, they're very different. Sadly, mine is going to rank a lot lower because I am not taking the introduction into account with my rankings. And the second half of it makes it drop off a lot for me, so it's below Phantoms.
Okay.
But above the Hellbound Heart.
Which is still high praise for you.
Yeah.
So that makes it your... It makes it your number 8.
Yeah, it's still top 10.
Yeah, which is still pretty good. I want to include the introduction because it's part of the book.
Yeah.
It's part of the printed book. I don't know. But...
I'm not disagreeing with you. I just didn't take it.
You took a different approach.
Yeah, I didn't take it into consideration when I was evaluating how I felt about it compared to what we've read.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair. Okay, so, Zombie Day, where we talk about references and Easter eggs. What's your favorite section in Powers of Darkness that's essentially unchanged from Dracula?
Basically, Thomas's journey to the castle and a lot of his first introductions with Dracula.
I have the exact same answer.
Yeah.
I love his conversations with all the villagers who are just trying to talk him out of going to Dracula's castle, and his meeting with Dracula and the deception there where he's disguised as the coachman. It's just all great.
Yeah. I think that is so super iconic that I couldn't have picked anything else.
Yes. Homework. Which is better, Dracula, Powers of Darkness, and why, assuming you think either is better than the other?
Dracula, because it's all in the same journal format.
I also think Dracula, but I think there's potential for the longer version, the Swedish version, to possibly be better.
I agree with that. I am super interested in actually getting to check that out.
There are parts of the first half in Dracula's Castle that I prefer in Powers of Darkness to the original novel.
White Lady.
Yeah.
Even just exploring the castle and finding the secret passages I really liked. I thought the cult was a little much, but...
The portrait gallery, all the
portrait gallery.
You get more backstory, more world building.
Dracula sounding horny.
But, so, maybe that all comes from the Swedish version, which gives you an expanded second half as well, which could be better. But yeah, I have to say Dracula is better. If for nothing else, that you get a full novel rather than half a novel and then Cliff Notes.
Yeah, with Powers of Darkness, you essentially get 3 characters, which are Thomas, Dracula, and the White Lady, and then bullet points on who the other characters would have been.
Yes.
In Dracula, you get all these fully fledged out characters.
Mina, Seward, Helsing, Lucy, like all these great characters.
And there's a little bit more of a mystery aspect in Dracula too.
Yeah.
Where a lot of it's not so clear cut and dry, like what Dracula's plans are exactly or why he's doing it exactly.
Which I feel like that happens a lot with like remakes and reboots and new adaptations where somebody's like, oh, here's the original piece and it has all these questions that are...
Let's explain them all.
Which is honest. That's something I said recently in a pre-show where I was like, oh, there's these mysteries in Tolkien's writing about the Entwives and the Blue Wizards. I hope Rings of Power actually gives us, oh, this is what we think happened with those things. But yeah, that's just how it is. Okay, question for the listeners. Have you read Powers of Darkness? Have you heard of Powers of Darkness? Did you know anything about this prior to listening to our podcast? And if not, are you now going to read that book? Reach out to us on our socials. Let us know. If you like this book and you're part of the 1% that Daniel estimated read Powers of Darkness but not Dracula, you should probably go fucking read Dracula.
Yeah. I think it is I said this when we reviewed it, it's the best classic example of horror.
Yes, and I completely agree. Upcoming on the Horror of Babylon, next week we are wrapping up our initial Dracula coverage with the 1992 film Bram Stoker's Dracula. We will definitely do more Dracula content on the way, but this is just kind of the wrap-up of our first stab at covering Dracula, the character, the story, and whatnot.
Yep.
All right, well, thank you for reading and recording about Powers of Darkness with me.
I was super excited to do it.
Yes, it's quite the experience. All right, everybody, thank you. Stay tuned for our socials, and we do want to give a quick shout out to our patrons: Abigail the First, Mother of Dragons, Breaker of Chains, and
Logan, the Full Metal Patron.
Four Horsemen Comics and Gaming, which you can visit in Morgantown, West Virginia at the Morgantown Mall, or the Mall at Robinson in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and say hello to that jolly pervert himself, Grampus III.
This show is brought to you by them. Stay tuned for our socials and stay scary.
Stay scary, everybody. I think we're getting that Full Metal
And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share and subscribe. Follow Daniel at DStarSick on Twitter. Follow Ryan at Darth Daimyo on the Bluebird app. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/The Horror of Babylon. In closing, you can let your friends know that The Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible and all other major podcast apps. Stay scary.